Wardens of Winter, welcome back to Winter Wolf's Den, where the fire is warm, the takes are hotter, and the stories run deep. Tonight we step through the wormhole into one of Sci-Fi's strangest journeys, Sliders, a show of brilliant ideas and absolutely unhinged disasters. Some episodes delivered peak 1990s sci-fi, proving the show could have been legendary. Others, well, let's just say getting unstuck from those worlds was a mercy. So grab your timer, watch out for the Cro-Mags, and let's break down the best of Sliders right here on Frostcast. Hey guys, welcome back to Winter Wolf's Den's Best of Worst of playlist, recently started by King Z and I, because we wanted to take a little trip back in time to the heyday for us anyway. I know there's some older stuff out there like we covered earlier in our previous inaugural episode of Best of Worst of. Go check that out. But tonight we're doing Sliders, because this one's near and dear to our hearts. It came up really quickly in the discussion of a must-review kind of situation, and it's already making us bend the rules. We were doing best of, singular, worst of, singular. We already threw that right out the window. We're each going to pick a best of episode, because believe it or not, each of us had, the minute we started talking about this, mentioned an episode, and the other was like, oh, dude, I remember that episode.
Yes,
and we literally had to put it to a coin toss, but we decided, no, we're going to give us each our due on our episode, but we're going to give it in a compressed format like we did last time. This won't go super long because we are going to respect you guys' time. But King, just tell me about Sliders, what you remember of it from back in the day. Like, how much did you enjoy this show?
Dude, I love Sliders. I mean, they're so tasty. They're just amazing. No, beside the joke.
Those were pulled pork sliders on top of it. Those look good. They
really
weren't chicken parm. They weren't burger. That was pulled pork. And I can respect that.
No, but anyways, the show Sliders, it was released in was it mid-90s, about 94, 95? 96, I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 96. So it's a show that I remembered. I watched it with my dad. It was because my dad was really big into sci-fi. He was a Trek fan. That's who got me into Next Generation. So it was just really just a fun show. I remember it very fondly, one, because it was during my childhood, but two, Jerry Connolly was... It's like watching his career and watching where he came from and how he grew as an actor kind of resonated with me too. Plus, I love the professor in that. Like, he's like he's just someone I want to go to college and have him as my professor. Yeah. So it just resonates with me. And if you didn't know, Jerry Connolly was the fat kid in Stand By Me.
Jerry O'Connell.
Jerry O'Connell. Yeah, Jerry O'Connell.
That's our per episode correction on a name. There we go.
Jerry O'Connell was the fat kid in Stand By Me with Will Wheaton.
So his career didn't grow. I mean, he didn't grow with his career. I think maybe he shrank as his career grew. Yeah. Because
this was like the show that launched him too. Like, he did a lot of stuff after this.
You gotta do it also. This is pre-Gimli.
Yeah.
Let's not forget Professor Maximilian Arturo. Goes on to be Gimli like 5 years later. No, you know what I love most about Sliders though? It was Quantum Leap for us. You know what I mean? Because it's like 10 years after Quantum Leap, but it's a little different in that these guys didn't have the same prime directive that Sam Beckett did, or the crew of Star Trek TNG had. Like, there's plenty of episodes of Sliders where they show up and they basically just take over the roles of their other selves on those worlds to get by and like move on. Like, they don't give a fuck. Like they really don't care. There's none of that no interference stuff. They interfere all the time.
And see, and that's why I thought it was important that we go back and look at the pilot again. I forgot how that part worked. Like, when they slid into a world, they would obviously be in that world, but what would happen to their other us's? And they never really ran into their other us's. Other than in the pilot.
In the pilot, yeah.
Yeah, it's about the only time he ever ran into his other self. And so I went and rewatched the pilot. So those who haven't watched Slider, what it is that boy genius going to college tried to create a anti-gravity machine. Instead, he built a portal to the multiverse. So if you don't like the multiverse and MCU, you can blame Sliders, because this is what gave birth to it.
It definitely had a hand in it.
Yeah, sure. So how it works is that he opens up the wormhole and it's like a roulette wheel. You don't know where you're going. You cannot control where you slide to. And it's an infinite possibility of worlds. And then you would slide into this world, see how it's different. And then later, the other three get pulled in with him, and you got fun and games from there on in the episodes going forth. The trick is that he had a timer. And one of the rules were that they initially broke is that you're not supposed to slide without the timer going off. That would bring you back to your original jumping place. Now it's you can't slide until the timer goes off.
Yeah, you got to survive the countdown, basically.
Yeah.
Like it's basically they changed the rule that way. It's now building a charge back up so they can get out, as opposed to having to get to a point A or B.
And it take you out and supposed to bring you back home, which his first slide is what happens. So that's the premise of the show, is a group of 4 trying to slide back home with an infinite possibility of worlds. This is like betting on a roulette table and always hitting green and then trying to hit green 2 afterwards.
I love that they talk about, even in like their opening credits there, they're talking about, imagine if you found if you created a device that allowed for infinite possibilities right here on Earth. It was infinite possibilities, but it was always 1996 San Francisco. Like in like 95, yeah. I think almost every episode that was it. Like that's how they kept the cost down.
And they did explain that, is that the time would be the same throughout all the worlds. It would never be a different time, and then it would just be situations would be different.
And that's the analogy I was going to draw to it, is that it's basically, if you guys are trying to figure out how Sliders works, it's basically TV Mad Libs, where they're like, we're just going to insert location, theme, and like main obstacle, I guess. Like there's just those 3 things, and all they do really is just cycle through like a Rolodex of like, okay, this is the medieval episode. Okay, this is the one where Quinn gets stuck in an NFL game. Okay, this one's the one where the professor's a zillion. Like they literally just roll through those like 3 or 4, those 3 or 4 things like on a wall. If they pick A, from column B, from column C, that's your episode. And that works into what we were talking about, old serialized television a couple weeks ago, where we're like, when they have 30 episodes a season, they can try some wild stuff, and Sliders tried wild stuff a lot.
Yeah,
like they went through some bizarre stuff. When I was checking out the sources to see what people kind of figured out on the worst episode, I found a website called Episode Ninja, and it actually has an aggregated vote of like, several thousand votes per episode. You can check worst episode, worst season, all that kind of interesting stuff. You guys should check it out. episodeninja.com. Free plug for them. This isn't like a sponsored gig or anything like that, but it was funny to see how most of the episodes are up here rated like 7.5 or an 8. And then we get to our worst of pick, which we'll do it in the next video. Like it falls off an effing cliff. It's pretty funny. It's pretty funny. It was almost kind of like I ran the same episode on Star Trek, and it did exactly the same thing. Yeah, it's all going pretty good. Whoop, just like that.
And the consensus is that the first 2 seasons were pretty solid. Towards the end of the second seasons, when it started falling off, and then a lot of circumstances happened, which we'll talk about in the next video, of why Sliders kind of fell off and became more of a joke than it was the brilliance of Sci-Fi that it captured in the first 2 seasons.
It definitely became meme, definitely, along the way. But dude, you know what? You're kind of sitting in the B chair. Why don't we talk about your episode first? Which one stood out for you that when we were talking about it, you brought it up right away, and I knew exactly the one you were talking about.
Yeah, it was the one that stuck in my head because, one, I was the nerd in school. I was kind of smart. I'm not gonna, I'm just not tuning my own horn, but I was kind of smart. But I also love sports, and that's where this one come in perfectly. It's called Eggheads. I believe it's episode 8 of the first season, and it is where the geniuses are the sports heroes of that world. Instead of Nike Just Do It, it had the slogan Just Think It. Wheaties, Breakfast of Geniuses. It had a lot of well-played verses on there.
Yeah. Einstein and the Gap ad.
Yep.
Einstein, Albert wears khakis. Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, it was where the geniuses were the jocks. And the thing was, everyone there, and this took on a concept of, like the social construct of the time and stuff like that, is that people believe that if you have, where it centers around the smart people of the world, that you'd have a better society. When you focus on intellect over ability, that it's going to be a better place for everybody. And what this episode does is proves that just because you're more academic and you're more educated doesn't mean you have more morality. And that's where you get into the crux of the episode, is where Quinn Mallory, the superstar of his college game, I forgot the actual name of the game, but it's a very weird game.
Mind Ball? I mean, he was reading the
Ball?
rule. He was reading the rule book. Remember at one point?
Yeah.
I thought it was Mind Ball. It wasn't Mind Control. It was Mind. I thought it was, maybe it wasn't Mind Ball, but Mind was in it.
But it was like you have to answer trivia questions by throwing around a ball without getting tagged, and you have to take squares. And then it comes in like Othello, where if you take a certain square, you take a whole bunch of squares and you just flip them all over. So it plays into a lot of the Brainiac games that are out there, big thinking games like Othello and trivia, but also has the athletics. You're running around, you have to dribble the ball, you have to pass it, and avoid being tagged/tackled. So it has some fun to it as well. So it's one of the episodes I really enjoyed.
It was a solid episode because they built in just enough of that game to make it feel real, on a watch where you're not trying to pick apart for the rules, especially when Wade and Rembrandt were sitting at the bar and they're like, oh man, he's down by 20. He needs to take square 21, but they're going to be on a prevent defense. And there's no way. That was one of the great parts of seeing old ESPN casters.
Yeah. Tim Johnson there.
Right. And he was like, I don't know, man, this isn't the Mallory of old. They're going to be on a prevent defense, and he's never getting in. He sounded like the water boy, the commentators on the Water Boy.
Yeah.
It sounded like they were legit treating it like a sport. It was kind of fun for that.
Yeah, it was very fun. You had the coach who wanted to win his first national championship.
My favorite part of that episode, though, like to tie into what you were saying about the intellect was always assumed that if you developed that the morals would ride shotgun with that. And this episode shows that it didn't, because when they jump in, the B plots, and there were 2 or 3 B plots in an episode of 45 minutes. The 2 main B plots were that Quinn Mallory and Professor Maximilian Arturo are douchebags in this world. And they both basically took off on their responsibilities. The main B plot is Quinn on that world is a degenerate gambler. He's in a lot of debt. He was going to throw the game. He had a history of shaving, was going to throw the game, White Men Can't Jump style. So there was a mob involvement as like a secondary B plot on top of that. Then Professor Maximilian there, they had faked that they had the sliding tech, or they figure out that they faked it because they had both taken off. We never see their version.
Because they refer to them as the sliders.
The sliders on campus where they are, right? At Caltech or wherever they were. So the professor on that world is like a womanizing douche knuckle. Like he had taken off on his wife, who he was married to in Slider's prime world. But in that world, in the real world, she had died. So his B plot was he goes to visit her to see if they can rekindle. And then he realizes I can't really do that because I'm not from here. And it's still kind of prime directive-y, but he leaves that cool video with his secretary where he like basically apologizes. He apologized to the wife. And then he leaves a video to himself and he tells the secretary, make sure I see this when I get back, knowing that he had just given himself like a 5-minute lecture on, dude, you got it made in the shade. You can't be a piece of shit here. You just can't. Yep. You're gonna die hopeless and alone if you go down this path more.
Yeah, very true.
I thought that was kind of cool. It was kind of dope. That stuff was kind of cool.
And that was the thing that made some of these earlier episodes, especially season 1, great. It did focus around a bunch of misfits in a world that didn't know what this world was about. Right. And like this one, they had to figure, like, he's supposed to be a sports star, but he has no idea how to play the game.
No, he was bad at it too. Like that first match out was ugly. UGLY. He ain't had no alibi.
Yeah. And then you had them looking around the whole campus and all their private stuff for these sliding tech, hoping that they'll be able to fix their slider, which did you check this out. Do you reprise this prop? The old Motorola flip phone that they just put like some Lego pieces on. That's what the slider is.
I didn't even realize it. That was probably one generation of cell phone before I got my first StarTAC phone, which basically had a calculator screen for a readout, but it was still like a $400 phone. It was dope as hell.
Do you remember when I moved down south and I came back up there to visit colleges?
Yeah.
My dad had one of those phones. He hid it from all of us, but he gave it to me in case of emergency. So I actually had one of those phones for about a week when I was up there in the Massland checking out colleges.
Nice. It was not the slide home, unfortunately.
It was the bus home.
I know, right? It was a long ride. Now you just talked about old technology reference. Here's an interesting cameo that I'm going to put up on the screen here. Did anybody recognize the Smoke Man from X-Files as the college administrator that the professor ran into? Thought it was nice seeing him. And then when we get into our worst of episode, I'm going to do an X-Files connection. Maybe you picked up on this, maybe you didn't. But the guy that rescues Wade at the end was Krychek. Get that? Yeah. Krychek, Smoking Man's son, Mulder's baby brother. I don't know. I don't remember the lore. But yeah, no, I was like, it's cool going back to these old shows because I'm like, that's cool that you're in this before you were in X-Files. That's cool you're in this. The professor's wife in this show was also a fairly significant character actor of the day in the 90s. I remember her from, triple X-Files reference. It just dawned on me. She was the wife of the astronaut that came back with the psychosis. And he was a test pilot. Yeah. And he was like scratching his skin off, and she had called the FBI. And then at the end, she's like, no, we're all good. They're taking care of everything. It closes the door in Mulder's face. That was the wife. So like all these people are kind of like corkboard, dude. The wires, man. They're going everywhere, man. They're in the trees, like that kind of thing. It's crazy.
It's in the water, man.
Dude, but it's a great episode. I see your tagline there too. So long, suckers. Of course, Quinn breaks them out with the little Latinaroo jumping off a building, which is always cool. To see them do some crazy shit to get into these things. I'd always be afraid of falling out of one. Portal, just face plant on pavement.
Yeah.
Seems like that might not be the thing. But it's a fun episode because they get themselves into these situations. They try to resolve stuff. You can't take most of it too seriously because the world building probably wouldn't hold up. Like it's not trying to be hard sci-fi. Like it's not trying to be Gravity or Interstellar or even like good Star Trek. Really, it's supposed to be campy. It's mid-90s. Yeah. And I think they pull that off for the most part in the better episodes, which according to the website I checked was most of them. They were all rated fairly high as far as fan scores.
And like you have like the brains and the of the organization with Matsumo Materos. You have the eagerness of the group, which is Quinn. You have the love interest, which is Wade, and then you have the soul, which is Rembrandt. Like he's the most out of place person of this because he's not a genius. He's a singer, part of a Four Tops type band back in the day. Yep. And he gets pulled in by accident and now he's stuck with them. But as he mixes with the team and holds them together in a very special type of way. My favorite part of my episode here, Eight Heads, is him gambling on a game he doesn't know the rules of.
Yeah. And Wade's like, wait a minute, you don't know how the game works and you bet everything? You idiot. And then they just hold the stare for 4 seconds. It was funny. The timing was pretty solid. But you know what? I like Rembrandt Brown on this show because he is that everyman character that's not the genius. Dude, he's the Winston Zedmore of this group. He's the not scientist, but they don't just stick, just like Winston, they don't just stick him with the comic relief. You know what I mean? They give him a couple of fairly soulful moments even through the pilot that I saw, which was a lot of comedy, but also they had that developmental moment with the gambling and Wade there. And then in our worst of episode, significant role. And then the episode I'm going to talk about when we flip over to my pick here, maybe we should just roll right into that.
All right, let's go.
They give him a lot of heavy lifting to do in this episode too. So, my pick for the best of episode, and this one had stuck with me. Dude, this show came out and this is also from season 1. This was 96. So we're coming up on 30 years, dude. It's crazy. Luck of the Draw. And the reason I picked this episode is because I'm a sucker for the dystopian future stuff that's camouflaged as utopia, where you typically have that kind of United Federation of Planets, everybody bought into the socialism kind of thing, and everybody's really happy because they're living post scarcity, so everybody's got fuel, everybody's got food, everybody's got a safe place to live. So really, and because everything's automated and we've already made it past the ugly part of people not having jobs and being unemployed and the scarcity part, everybody's happy. So everybody can just go be a fucking painter or they can just play baseball or whatever they want to do. I love those kind of dystopians. The 1984 dystopia, I don't look forward to that. That shit was a warning, not a training guide, guys. And thankfully we're working past that. That was my cheap political plug for the day. That's as far as I'm going. But Luck of the Draw is exactly that. Again, it can't hold up to the scrutiny of world building because the premise here in Luck of the Draw is that in this society, they had taken to heart some teachings and some warnings of a 19th century economist. I think it was Thomas Malthus, who the professor explained was listen, we're boned as long as our population growth outpaces our food supply.
Yeah.
So we're basically boned forever. That society took that to heart and put in extreme we can imagine extreme population controls and limits globally. Like not just in America, not just in San Francisco, like everywhere. Because they say, like Quinn reads it out of like a scientific journal, that this world only has 500 million people in it.
Yeah, half a billion.
Million. Right. And the professor's like, dude, that's like less than 10% of what we got in the real world. Right? Yeah. And it's still present day, 1996, 97, whenever, United States, San Francisco. So everything in this world is running great. There's no pollution. There's no crime. Prices are like set to be like 1940s, like produce prices. Cause the professor even mentions it's like when I was a boy in England, you can get like 5 apples for $1 kind of thing. But the unique dystopian part to this episode, to this San Francisco, is that every citizen there, actually every person, I guess, you probably need to be a citizen. That might not even be a thing. Who knows?
Yeah.
They have a lottery. They have a state-sanctioned lottery where you access it through ATM machines. So any withdrawal you make for ATM can be any amount you want, increases your chances of winning the lottery, winning a big $5 million payout. You get that cool, the white card. Like
the white card, where people just can't tell you no. The white card is where they couldn't tell you no.
Vendors.
Use it. Vendors. They say. So if you wanted to go to Tiffany's and buy a diamond ring, you show them the white card, and they just give it to you.
And Wade bought it wasn't a Benz. Was it a Beamer? She was at a car dealership. I think it was
Mercedes.
BMW. It was I remember the badge on the front. It was either Mercedes or BMW, and they're happy about it because the world just works for them. Like that's the thing. They've all bought in like a cult for the most part, but we get to that B story again, right? But the rub here is that the more money you take to enter into the lottery to win the $5 million to leave to your family or whatever, is you put in an increased amount of chances, Hunger Games style, that your number gets called to win the lottery, where then you're forced to undergo ritual suicide. Like that's the thing. They manage the population by keeping everybody happy and keeping numbers down. So sure as shit, Wade wins. She didn't take the biggest amount out either, which I thought was clever. Rembrandt took out $5,000. She took out $1,000.
Yeah.
And the professor took out a $5, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, so that was funny. That was funny.
He was like,
I'll take $5.
Legolas, I got 2 already. I took 5,000. Like, no, I'm going to clip that in. So I like this episode because they do this crystal clear. We're setting everything up nice and efficiently. In my episode, right away it had a perfect stinger like TNG used to have, where they take their money out of the ATM, and as they're walking away, the 2 guys behind them at line, one of them goes, "You got to admire the high rollers," and the other guy's like, "Yeah, may they rest in peace." Stinger sound, da-da, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Sliders.
And then cut to the first commercial, right? Sliders, right? And I noticed that through the pilot too. They did a lot of setup where, like, when Quinn was driving to school, the talk on the radio was about global warming and something else. And then when he gets to school, he sees the homeless guy preaching about how communism was the way. And then, of course, he slides. And when he gets back, global warming didn't happen. They got that wrong. It was a global freeze. So he had to run out of that world. And then when he thought he got home, the world he was in, communism actually won. And they had to run away from that.
Well, that was the third world in that pilot. Right. He went to 3 worlds. There was one where everything was backwards.
Right. Green was red. Red was green. Someone called him an a-hole. Just learn to drive. It's green. Slow down. Wherever he said it was crazy. It's red. Go. Yeah.
And then there was the second world, which was the ice world.
That was awesome.
And then the third world is where Russia took over the United States.
But they had set up, but they had mentioned it do we say this all the time on this channel? Set up and pay off. And it's not even big stuff.
Yeah.
It's
it was simple.
Glue. It's the simple glue that makes everything make sense. That way, when they have to do something dumb, like an ice tornado, I'm like, okay.
Whatever.
Cool. Works for me. But anyways, luck of the draw, dude. You remembered this the same way I remembered Eggheads, and I thought it was funny that we both knew right away these episodes. I thought that was awesome. What did you like most about this episode? Like, where were you at?
One, there was a bit of mystery of who turned them in. Was it the new love interest, Ryan? But it turned out to be a Rembrandt's new love interest, because they're trying to their only police is if you tamper with the lottery. So it's like someone's trying to do something with the lottery, and it ended up with Rembrandt was trying to save her life, thinking that she's a unwilling participant, and she was actually happy, bought into the cult feeling that it was time for her to, was it move forward is what they called it?
Making way. It was
making way. That was it. Making way.
Mm-hmm.
You had that little mystery element, and then you play into the whole Thanos, less population, more resources, instead of doubling resources and having people.
Listen, that's a Thanos problem, not a Sliders problem.
So one of the things about that, the scientist who came up with this whole theory of like the population always growing and what
economist Thomas Malthus, real person,
economist, will outpace the food supply. Is it's based on a theory, and it was also played out in what's that book? It's a book and movie, Inferno, that in the Robert Langdon series written by Dan Brown. Is that he was talking about like overpopulation, and he took a piece of paper and he ripped it in half. He's like, it took us, was it like 20,000 years to get to 1 million people, and then it only took us half that time to get to 2 million people. Then it took us even half that time to get to 4 million people. He kept ripping a piece of paper and ripping it in half, and he kept stacking up higher and higher, doubling up. And like visual. And at the time that they made this show, the world population was 5 billion. I mean, we're close to 8 billion now. The United States alone is 338 million. So it was almost
measured.
Which is close to what the whole world population that one was. So it worked out well that they would have such extreme birth control and euthanasia type rights in this. Like Dr. Kevorkian probably was president in this.
Oh, dude, that would have been a great time, but I think that would have been controversial in the day, given that I think that was current.
That was very current
at the time. Yeah, but I mean, the professor even mentioned that, where he's like, you can argue with the means, but you can't argue with the results that they have here, because it's basically utopia, because most of the people there bought in. Like you saw Rembrandt's love interest there, but she had bought in 100%. And it's not even so much that he tampered with it by trying to kidnap her to save her. She called the cops on him because she thought he was delusional for not wanting to do it. And then they interpreted that as tampering, and they were going to take him down for the process, which is basically we torture and kill you anyway, thereby lowering the numbers even more.
And then they had their right to lifers in this.
And that's the B plot. Tell me about the B plot. I got to get a drink.
So the right. So one of the things that they forget about every time they go to a new world is that they don't research the world. They just assume that it's more like their world with a little difference. They don't see the downside to everything until some big plot thing happens. And this is where Mallory's having a issue with Wade getting all this attention, not knowing what's so special about it. He knows that there's a cache. The second shoe is going to drop at some point.
Nothing's free.
And then he gets, he's coming to the ceremony. So they have this big ball for them, because they're supposed to tell themselves the nets a day. So they have this big ball, then they have the toast at midnight, and then each of them have their certain time where they go and make way for, as they're supposed to. Outside, there's a group of people protesting it, and they're called the Right to Lifers. And he gets a flyer, and he kind of like, big
eureka moment, dude.
Yeah, it happens all the time in this series.
Episode. It's the structure, man. It's the 2/3 of the episode point where they're like, something we didn't know that the audience knew an hour ago is gonna screw us. We gotta get the F out of Dodge, and then the show happens.
That was one of my catches, that they don't really research. They just kind of go into a world thinking that it's safe, and then realize that every world has its problems. Just to think that your world is one way doesn't mean that every world's going to be the same way.
Right.
And just because a world is different doesn't mean it's better.
Well, this was definitely a Wade episode too, because a lot of the dramatic conflict in this one was, I think they were trying to always write in the will they, won't they for Wade and for Quinn. And in this one, they had a couple of scenes where they brushed up against the, we said we weren't going to do this. I didn't say we weren't going to do this. I thought we were going to. They had that back and forth, and then Quinn got a little butthurt when Wade went to the dance with Agent Krychek. I told you he was in this episode. Agent Krychek there, who ended up not being the douche knuckle, and they set him up very effectively as the red herring douche knuckle. But I think one of the last things that I kind of really enjoyed about the show, and I wonder if they didn't know if this show was gonna do well enough to get, I mean, they had all this info in real time, if they were gonna go season 2, because it ends on a cliffhanger where they all make the slide. They bring Agent Krychek with them as like their 5th guy, because they were like, I don't know if it's gonna have enough energy to transport 5 people, but they were gonna try to bring Rembrandt's new love interest, but she opted out, obviously. And then when Krychek helped Wade escape the lottery police, they're like, well, we can't just leave him here. If he wants to come, he can come. So anyways, they all jump through, and one of the cops takes a shot that actually hits Quinn.
Yeah.
So when they end up on the other side of the portal, he's just down. Like, he never gets up on the other side.
No, he stands up and he falls back down.
But I'm saying, but he's out. That's it.
Yeah.
And then Wade, of course, feels around behind him, and her hand comes back bloody. And then she does the cheesy Wilhelm scream, which she should have said Quinn and not no. That was kind of dumb. But you don't know. And then fast forward to episode 1 of season 2, all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, Krychek took the bullet out of your back, and then he disappeared. And I don't think they ever see him again for 5 seasons.
Yeah,
I think that's it. Like,
they weren't paying his day rate again.
They were like, nah, dog, we're not doing.
Just write him out.
Yep. No, we're gonna keep O'Connell. This is actually working out okay. We're okay here.
Yeah.
So it's a good zany episode. The world building, like I said, it's shaky, but as long as the world building's interesting, I don't care if it's shaky. Like, I know what I'm signing up for in Sliders. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's one of the great things about Sliders in general was the cast chemistries. I've talked about, like, how they played off each other pretty well. Yeah. Of course, being held together with the acting chops of Maximilian Otero. He's the one who kind of held that together, while the other ones grew apart, grew into the role. I should say, not grew apart, but grew into the role.
Definitely grew into it. Sure.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And then, like, the whole will they, won't they? I think they overdid a lot, but we all knew that Wade, like, from the first episode, had a thing for Quinn.
Right.
But he was not, like, playing into it. Like, even the Quinn who came and fixed his math problem and told him about Sliders, like, you're gonna love it. He's like, he's been married, and I believe he's been married to Quinn because he's been married to
Wade.
Wade because he kisses her in that episode.
And then Quinn Prime, when he meets up with Wade later, is completely oblivious to that, and she's like, "What do you mean you don't know? What do you mean it meant nothing?" or whatever she says. Like, she's pissed. She's already on the clock for having feelings for him, which was good. I think like you said, man, once certain elements of this main group disappeared or got written into different alternative roles of themselves, I don't think it held up that well. We'll have to talk about that enough.
And we'll talk about that in the next episode of the worst of.